Well, Isaiah chapter 31 is what we're going to talk about today, and it's basically a continuation from chapter 30, continuing this conversation about why Israel should not trust Egypt but trust God. So let's jump into this one and get started. Verse 1, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. So this is, again, kind of a reiteration of what we did in chapter 30, of realizing Egypt looks strong. They have lots of army stuff, but they really aren't that prepared. They're not really that good of an army anymore. It's a hollow promise, basically, and it's not going to work out for Egypt or for Israel by trusting in Egypt. You need to trust in God, basically. Verse 2, yet he also is wise and will bring evil and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers and against the help of them that work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses flesh and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is holpen shall fall down, and they all shall fell together. So this is what they're talking about here, is again, God in Egypt. Egypt's real, it's physical, it's real. God is spiritual, but God will do better for you, basically. It's going to be the better place to go. So this is a good lesson for us to always remember. Trust in God, not man. In fact, Hugh Nibley had this to say in reference to verse 3. He said, what makes a nation great? Power and gain is the answer we give today. The thing is to be number one in military and economic clout. They thought so in Isaiah's day as well. Woe unto them that rely on horses and chariots, because they are powerful, but look not unto the Holy One of Israel. No real security is to be gained by alliances. No sword, either of the strong or of the weak power, shall overcome overcome the problems. The Lord has his own plans for Assyria, and no one could have guessed what they were. Where does security lie? In digging the defenses of Jerusalem, you are merely digging your graves. The only true defense is the calling of the priesthood in the temple. If you play the game of realistic power politics, you can't expect any but the usual reward. That's from Hugh Nibley's book, Old Testament Related Studies, chapter 8. So that's this point that God's trying to get across. Yes, God's way of defending and doing this is going to be different than what they think is logical or makes sense. But it will be a better way to do it. God's trying to build faith in him. So you have to be willing to believe in him and have him then help you after that belief is established. So that's faith, helping you to believe in him. Even though you might not see and understand what the outcome is, believe in him and he will help you out. Rather, people are trying to go what they would call the logical way of doing things, which it just makes sense to their mind. And they think that's the way to go. That's truth. If it makes sense, it's truth. Technically, in a broad sense, that is true, but sometimes things can make sense, but it isn't completely true either. We see this a lot with false arguments. It sounds like a 1 + 1 = 2 situation, but it really doesn't. That's not really what it really is. So again, this is that challenge Israel has. Now, verse 4, for thus hath the Lord spoken unto me, like as the lion and the young lion roaring on his prey. When a multitude of shepherds is called forth against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor abase himself for the noise of them. So shall the Lord of hosts come down to fight for Mount Zion and for the hill thereof. So even though the enemies might be roaring like major lions, or you might have a huge force coming after you, God will handle it and take care of it if you let him. This is good advice for us for all the problems we have in our life. Sometimes we think we can solve our own problems by doing things logically. And the reality is if we solve the problems with gospel principles in mind, if we apply good gospel principles, which is encouraging God to help us in our life, things will work out much better. They don't always match up the way we think they should, but they will be a lot better for us if we follow what God says. In the long run, it'll work better. Verse 5, as birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending also he will deliver it, and passing over he will preserve it. Turn ye unto him from whom the children of Israel have deeply revolted. So again, Israel's gone away from me, but if you turn back, I will help you. Verse 7, for in that day every man shall cast away his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which your own hands have made unto you for a sin. So that's reiterating what we talked about as well in chapter 30, this idea of you've turned away from God to fake gods who will tell you what you want to hear, or they won't really speak, but you're pretend that they'll tell you what you want to hear. You will get rid of them because you'll focus on the real God. There's no need for fake gods if you have the real one you're working with. Verse 8, then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword not of a mean man shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited. And he shall pass over to his stronghold for fear, and his princes shall be afraid of the ensign, saith the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, and his furnace in Jerusalem. We talked about that burning, that idea, the altar burning, sacrifices and things happening at the temple in the last chapter as well. So 31 is kind of a shortened, condensed version of 30, basically. But when the nation of Israel finally says, okay, God, we are willing to follow what you say, he will then save them from Assyria. But not before they go through some pain, because they're not willing to repent quickly. They're going to take some time. So we're going to see that here in a few more chapters. So let's jump over to our next chapter as we continue to learn from Isaiah.